There are seasons in life when everything suddenly becomes quiet. The calls stop coming. The invitations disappear. People who once surrounded you begin fading away without explanation. Conversations lose meaning. Places that once felt exciting now feel empty. Even the things that used to entertain you no longer satisfy your spirit. And because you are human, your first reaction is to believe something has gone wrong. You think you are being rejected, forgotten, punished, left behind. But what if the isolation you fear is actually the beginning of your elevation? What if heaven removes distractions before revealing destiny? Most people misunderstand isolation because they associate loneliness with failure. Society trains people to believe that being constantly surrounded by noise, attention, and approval is success. They measure worth by popularity, validation, and visibility. But throughout history, every person who carried greatness was first separated from the crowd, not because they were cursed, but because preparation requires privacy. There are certain transformations that cannot happen in noisy environments. A seed does not become a tree in public. It develops underground, hidden from human eyes, in darkness, in silence, in pressure. And the chosen one experiences the same process. The world may look at your isolation and assume you are losing. But spiritually, something deeper is happening. Your mind is changing. Your awareness is expanding. Your soul is being strengthened in ways nobody else can see. Isolation is where illusions begin to die. When you are constantly surrounded by people, distractions become easy. You can avoid thinking deeply. You can escape self-reflection. You can numb your spirit through entertainment, conversations, and endless noise. But when you are alone long enough, eventually you are forced to confront yourself, your fears, your habits, your weaknesses, your hidden pain. And that confrontation is uncomfortable. Most people run from silence because silence exposes truth. The moment the world becomes quiet, they begin hearing the thoughts they spent years trying to ignore. They realize how much of their identity was built on pleasing others. They recognize how much energy they wasted chasing temporary approval. They discover how dependent they became on external validation just to feel valuable. But the chosen one is separated because dependence must be broken. You cannot hear divine direction while addicted to constant noise. That is why isolation often happens before purpose. Before every major transformation, there is separation. The eagle leaves the flock before learning to soar at higher altitudes. Athletes disappear into training before becoming champions. Great leaders endure seasons of solitude before stepping into influence. Even nature itself follows this pattern. Growth happens in hidden places long before it becomes visible. Yet people panic the moment their life becomes quiet. They immediately try to fill the emptiness. They chase distractions. They force connections that no longer align with their spirit. They return to environments that are draining simply because they fear being alone. But chosen people cannot grow that way forever. Eventually, life begins removing what no longer belongs in your future. Certain friendships begin collapsing. Certain relationships lose connection. Certain environments start feeling heavy and exhausting. Not because you are becoming better than others, but because your spirit is outgrowing places that can no longer contain your growth. And that process feels lonely. There are nights when you sit by yourself wondering why nobody understands you anymore. You begin questioning why your energy feels different, why your desires are changing, why your tolerance for shallow conversations is disappearing, why you suddenly crave peace more than attention. Because something inside you is awakening. The isolation is not empty. It is instructional. There are lessons that can only be learned when nobody is clapping for you. Because true strength is not built through applause. It is built through endurance. When nobody checks on you but you keep moving forward. When nobody motivates you but you remain disciplined. When nobody understands your vision but you continue preparing anyway. That is where inner power is developed. The crowd can celebrate you, but only solitude can shape you. And one of the hardest truths the chosen one must accept is this: not everyone can go where you are going. Some people were only assigned to a chapter of your life, not the entire story. Their absence is painful because you became emotionally attached to who you were while they were present. But growth demands change, and change often requires separation. You cannot evolve while constantly clinging to expired versions of yourself. That is why isolation feels like loss at first, because old identities begin dying. The version of you that needed approval starts disappearing. The version of you that feared being alone begins weakening. The version of you that tolerated disrespect just to keep people around slowly fades away. and in its place, something stronger begins emerging. A person who no longer needs noise to feel important. A person who values peace more than popularity. A person who understands that solitude can become a sacred place of preparation. Because isolation has a purpose, it teaches discernment, it builds emotional endurance, it sharpens focus, it reveals distractions, it exposes hidden weaknesses, it strengthens spiritual awareness, and perhaps most importantly, it teaches you that your value was never dependent on how many people surrounded you. Some of the most dangerous moments in life happen when people mistake constant company for genuine connection. Many are surrounded by crowds yet spiritually empty. Many are constantly entertained yet mentally exhausted. Many are deeply connected online while internally disconnected from themselves. But isolation strips away illusions. It forces you to discover who you are without the performance. There is a reason the world fears silence. Because silence has the power to reveal everything people spend their lives trying to hide. The moment the noise disappears, reality becomes impossible to escape. Suddenly there are no distractions left to numb the mind. No endless conversations to cover insecurity, no entertainment to silence inner conflict, no crowd to blend into, just you, your thoughts, and the uncomfortable truths waiting beneath the surface. That is why most people avoid being alone for too long. They keep televisions running in empty rooms. They scroll endlessly through their phones. They surround themselves with constant activity. They fear quiet moments because quiet moments force self-confrontation. But the chosen one eventually discovers something powerful. God often speaks in silence, not noise. The problem is that modern life has trained people to worship distraction. Every second, the world competes for your attention. Notifications, opinions, arguments, entertainment, endless information flooding the mind from every direction. People wake up distracted and fall asleep distracted. Their spirit never gets a moment to breathe. And because of this, many cannot recognize divine direction, even when it is right in front of them. The noise of the world becomes louder than the voice within. That is why separation becomes necessary. There are moments when heaven removes you from chaos so your spirit can hear clearly again. Not every closed door is rejection. Sometimes it is protection from noise that would destroy your focus. Because clarity cannot survive constant distraction. Imagine trying to hear a whisper in the middle of a storm. No matter how important the message is, the noise around you prevents you from understanding it. And spiritually, many people live exactly this way. Their mind is so overcrowded that wisdom cannot settle inside them. Their attention is fragmented. Their thoughts are scattered. Their emotions are controlled by every external voice around them. But silence changes everything. Silence slows the chaos. Silence exposes truth. Silence sharpens awareness. When you finally sit alone long enough, you begin noticing things you ignored for years. You begin recognizing how much energy certain people drain from you. You begin seeing how many decisions were based on fear instead of purpose. You begin understanding how often you betrayed your own peace just to avoid disappointing others. And those realizations are life-changing. Because the moment a person becomes comfortable with silence, they stop being controlled by noise. That is why many chosen people experience seasons where they feel disconnected from the world. They no longer crave constant social interaction. Loud environments become exhausting. Shallow conversations feel empty. Their spirit begins searching for depth instead of distraction, and the people around them misunderstand it. Some call them distant. Others call them antisocial. Some assume they are depressed or broken. But what if they are simply awakening? There is a difference between loneliness and sacred solitude. Loneliness comes from feeling abandoned. Sacred solitude comes from being spiritually repositioned. One weakens the spirit, the other strengthens it. Because in solitude, you begin hearing things your distracted life once drowned out. Your intuition becomes sharper, your thoughts become clearer, your spirit becomes more sensitive. You begin recognizing patterns, you notice manipulation faster. You become aware of environments that disturb your peace. The world becomes easier to understand when your mind is no longer crowded by endless noise. That is why wisdom has always been connected to silence. The deepest revelations rarely happen in crowds. They happen in quiet moments, in reflection, in stillness, in private battles nobody else sees. Many people want purpose, but they are terrified of silence. They want clarity while constantly drowning themselves in distraction. They ask for direction, but never become still long enough to receive it. But the chosen one is eventually pulled into silence whether they like it or not. Life itself begins creating distance. Certain friendships fade away. Certain habits stop satisfying the soul. Certain environments become unbearable, and suddenly you find yourself spending more time alone than ever before. At first, it feels uncomfortable. You start overthinking, you replay memories, you confront emotions you spent years suppressing. But slowly something begins changing. Your dependence on noise weakens. You stop needing constant validation. You stop craving attention from people who never truly valued you. You stop seeking distractions every time discomfort appears. And in that silence, your spirit begins rebuilding itself. Because silence is not empty. It is full of revelation. The problem is that most people quit too early. The moment solitude becomes uncomfortable, they run back to noise. They reconnect with toxic environments. They reopen doors that should have remained closed. They fill their schedule with meaningless distractions simply to avoid sitting alone with themselves. But growth lives on the other side of discomfort. The chosen one learns to stay in the silence long enough for transformation to happen. And eventually, the silence no longer feels frightening. It becomes peaceful. You begin enjoying your own company. You begin protecting your energy. You begin realizing that peace is more valuable than attention. That is when spiritual maturity begins developing. Because mature people understand something the distracted world does not. Not every voice deserves access to your mind. Some voices create confusion. Some create fear. Some create insecurity. Some pull you further away from your purpose. And if you are constantly listening to everyone, eventually you lose the ability to hear yourself. That is why silence becomes necessary for clarity. There are answers hidden in stillness. There is strength hidden in solitude. There is wisdom hidden behind closed doors. And perhaps that is why your life has been changing lately. You no longer fit into the same conversations. You no longer enjoy the same distractions. You no longer feel comfortable in environments that once felt normal. Because your spirit is becoming more sensitive to what drains it. The chosen one cannot stay asleep forever. Eventually, the noise becomes unbearable. Eventually, the soul begins craving something deeper, not entertainment, not popularity, not constant stimulation, but truth, peace, direction, understanding, discipline, awareness. The chosen one was never meant to walk the same path as everyone else. That is the truth many people spend their entire lives trying to avoid. From the very beginning, there was always something different about you. Even when you tried to fit in, something inside you felt disconnected from the crowd. You could sit in a room full of people and still feel alone. You could laugh with others and still sense a deeper emptiness they could not understand. And for years, you blamed yourself for it. You thought maybe you were too sensitive, too deep, too different, too emotional, too ambitious, too aware. But what if that difference was never a flaw? What if the discomfort you feel around shallow environments is actually a sign that your spirit was designed for more? Because chosen people rarely feel fully understood by the world around them. Their mind works differently. Their energy feels different. Their desires begin shifting away from what society worships. While others chase popularity, the chosen one searches for purpose. While others crave attention, the chosen one craves meaning. While others fear standing alone, the chosen one slowly learns that solitude is part of the journey. And that path becomes painful because humans naturally desire connection. Everyone wants to feel accepted. Everyone wants to belong somewhere. But the chosen one eventually discovers that trying to fit into every environment comes at a dangerous cost. The cost of losing yourself. Many people spend years shrinking their spirit just to make others comfortable. They silence their thoughts to avoid criticism. They hide their vision to avoid rejection. They pretend to enjoy things that no longer align with their soul simply because they fear being isolated. But the chosen path demands authenticity, and authenticity separates people. The moment you stop pretending, certain individuals become uncomfortable around you. The moment you begin growing, old environments start resisting your transformation. The moment your mindset expands, conversations that once entertained you begin feeling empty. Because growth changes your tolerance. What once felt normal no longer satisfies your spirit, and this is where the loneliness begins. The chosen one often walks through seasons where nobody understands what they are becoming. Friends may misunderstand your distance. Family may question your decisions. People may accuse you of changing as though transformation is betrayal. But how can a person evolve without changing? Growth requires separation from old identities. The problem is that many people only love the version of you they could control. They were comfortable when you doubted yourself, comfortable when you stayed small, comfortable when you needed their approval to feel valuable. But the moment you begin awakening, everything shifts. You stop tolerating disrespect. You stop begging for acceptance. You stop chasing temporary validation. You stop abandoning your peace just to maintain connections that drain your spirit. And suddenly, people who once celebrated you begin distancing themselves from you. Not because you became worse, but because your growth exposes their stagnation. That is one of the hardest realities the chosen one must accept. Not everyone assigned to your past can follow you into your future. Some people only existed to teach lessons. Some relationships were temporary classrooms. Some connections were never designed to survive your transformation, and holding on to expired environments can delay your destiny. Yet many chosen people struggle with this truth because they have compassionate hearts. They want to save everyone. They want to bring everyone with them. They want to believe every relationship can survive growth. But not everyone is willing to grow with you. Some people are committed to comfort. Some are addicted to negativity. Some fear change because change threatens the identity they built around limitation. And when you begin rising mentally, emotionally, or spiritually, they may try to pull you back toward the version of yourself they recognize, not always intentionally, sometimes unconsciously, because people feel safest around what is familiar. That is why chosen people often experience resistance from those closest to them. The world celebrates transformation from a distance but resists it up close. People admire confidence until it no longer depends on their approval. They admire discipline until your growth reminds them of their excuses. They admire ambition until it forces them to confront their own fear of change. And because of this, the chosen path becomes lonely at times. You begin realizing that fewer people understand your vision. Fewer people relate to your mindset. Fewer people can walk beside you without misunderstanding your evolution. But loneliness is not proof you are lost. Sometimes loneliness is evidence that you are finally becoming who you were meant to be. Because greatness has always required separation from the crowd. The eagle cannot fly at high altitudes while carrying the weight of birds that fear the sky. The lion does not ask permission from sheep before walking through the wilderness. Strong trees grow deep roots because they survive storms alone. And spiritually, the chosen one undergoes the same process. You are being strengthened through isolation, not to become cold, not to become arrogant, but to become secure in who you are without depending on constant external validation. That is why your life may feel unfamiliar right now. Your interests are changing. Your priorities are shifting. Your tolerance for chaos is disappearing. You are no longer entertained by meaningless distractions. You are no longer willing to trade peace for temporary attention. You are no longer willing to betray your intuition simply to avoid being alone. Because deep inside, your spirit understands something your old self could not comprehend. The chosen path was never meant to be crowded. Few people are willing to confront themselves deeply enough to transform. Few people are disciplined enough to remain focused, while others waste years in distraction. Few people are willing to endure misunderstanding in order to protect their purpose. And that is why chosen people often feel spiritually isolated long before they feel successful. Their journey begins internally before it becomes visible externally. Long before the world notices their growth, battles are already being fought in private. Mental battles, emotional battles, spiritual battles, against insecurity, against doubt, against the temptation to return to environments that feel familiar but limit their future. Because one of the greatest tests of the chosen one is learning how to keep walking forward. Even when nobody fully understands the journey, there are moments in life when everything seems to fall apart at once. Your emotions become heavy. Your thoughts become chaotic. Nothing feels stable anymore. The things that once gave you certainty suddenly disappear, and you are left standing in the middle of confusion wondering what happened to your life. You try to stay strong. You try to keep pretending everything is normal. But deep inside, you feel exhausted. And the hardest part is that nobody around you truly understands what you are carrying. From the outside, people may think you are simply going through a difficult season. But internally, it feels like your entire identity is collapsing. The version of yourself that once felt secure no longer exists. Your motivation disappears. Your energy changes. You begin questioning everything you once believed about yourself, your future, and even the people around you. And because the process feels painful, you assume you are breaking down. But what if you are actually being rebuilt? What if the chaos is not destruction but transformation? Because every major awakening begins with disruption. No person evolves without discomfort. No strong soul is created through ease. Growth requires the death of old patterns, old thinking, old habits, and old identities. And whenever something old begins dying inside you, it feels painful because humans naturally cling to familiarity, even when familiarity is limiting their future. That is why breakdowns often happen right before breakthroughs. Life begins shaking everything that can no longer support your next level. Relationships start exposing their cracks. Distractions stop satisfying your spirit. False confidence begins collapsing. The masks you wore for years become too heavy to carry, and suddenly you no longer recognize yourself. At first, this experience feels terrifying. You feel emotionally lost, mentally overwhelmed, spiritually disconnected. You wonder why you cannot return to the person you used to be. You attempt to recreate old routines, old mindsets, old environments, but nothing feels the same anymore. The things that once distracted you no longer bring peace. The people you once depended on no longer understand you. The version of yourself you spent years building starts crumbling right in front of your eyes. But transformation always begins with dismantling. A building cannot be renovated without tearing down weak structures first. A forest cannot regenerate without old growth making room for new life. Even nature itself follows the pattern of destruction before renewal. And spiritually, chosen people experience the same process. There comes a point where your old self can no longer carry your future. Your old mindset becomes too limited. Your old habits become too destructive. Your old fears become too small for the life waiting ahead of you. So life begins forcing change, not gently, but powerfully. Because sometimes pain is the only thing strong enough to interrupt patterns that comfort could never break. That is why many chosen people go through seasons where they feel emotionally shattered. Not because they are weak, but because everything false inside them is being exposed. The confidence that depended on external validation begins collapsing. The relationships built on pretending begin fading. The distractions used to escape inner pain stop working. And without those things, you are finally forced to confront yourself honestly. Your wounds, your insecurities, your unresolved fears, your emotional dependence, your hidden anger, your self-doubt. Not to destroy you, but to heal what was buried for years. The breakdown becomes the beginning of awareness. Because before awakening, many people live unconsciously. They repeat unhealthy cycles without questioning them. They tolerate disrespect because they fear abandonment. They settle for survival because they are afraid of change. They chase distractions to avoid confronting their emptiness. But eventually, life interrupts the cycle. And when it does, it feels painful because illusion is comfortable until truth exposes it. That relationship you thought would last forever suddenly ends. That career path you depended on suddenly changes. That environment you trusted suddenly reveals its toxicity. And you are left standing in uncertainty. But uncertainty is often where rebirth begins. The chosen one is rarely transformed through comfort. Comfort keeps people asleep. Pain awakens them. Pain forces reflection. Pain creates depth. Pain reveals strength that comfort never required. That is why some of the strongest people carry stories of intense struggle. Their suffering became the fire that refined them. Their darkest seasons forced them to discover resilience they never knew existed. And perhaps that is exactly what is happening in your life right now. What feels like collapse may actually be preparation. Because the person you are becoming cannot think the way you used to think, cannot tolerate the way you used to live, cannot remain emotionally attached to what once kept you small. Transformation demands release. And release feels painful because people become emotionally attached to versions of themselves that no longer align with their future. You become attached to old routines, old identities, old relationships, old coping mechanisms. Even when those things are hurting you, that is why change feels uncomfortable. Part of you wants growth, another part of you fears losing familiarity, and the battle between those two forces creates emotional chaos. But eventually, the chosen one reaches a moment where staying the same becomes more painful than changing. That is when the reset begins. You start valuing peace more than attention. You begin protecting your energy. You become more disciplined with your time. You stop seeking approval from people who never understood your worth. Slowly your priorities shift. You become quieter, more focused, more intentional. Not because life made you cold, but because suffering taught you what truly matters. The breakdown humbled you. It stripped away illusions. It exposed the fragility of things you once depended on. And through that process, something stronger started emerging. a deeper awareness, a sharper mind, a stronger spirit, a calmer presence. Because real transformation is not loud, it happens internally first. Long before the world notices your growth, your mindset begins changing in private. You begin seeing situations differently. You stop reacting emotionally to everything around you. You become less desperate for external validation. You start understanding that not every loss is punishment and not every closed door is failure. Some endings are necessary for evolution. Some painful seasons exist to separate you from distractions that would have destroyed your future. And sometimes the greatest thing that can happen to a chosen person is the complete collapse of the version of themselves that was never meant to survive the next chapter. One of the hardest battles the chosen one will ever face is learning how to close the door, not because the door is locked, but because emotional attachment keeps reopening it. People often believe spiritual growth is only about gaining wisdom, discipline, or strength. But true transformation also requires separation. It requires the courage to walk away from distractions, toxic environments, unhealthy attachments, and anything that slowly drains your spirit. And that process is painful because human beings naturally cling to familiarity. Even when something is hurting them, they stay connected because the familiar feels safer than the unknown. That is why many people remain trapped in cycles that quietly destroy their peace. They keep entertaining relationships that weaken them emotionally. They continue listening to voices that feed insecurity. They tolerate environments that exhaust their spirit simply because they fear loneliness more than suffering. But the chosen one eventually realizes something powerful. Not everything that has access to your life deserves access to your energy. Energy is sacred. Your focus is sacred. Your peace is sacred. Your mind is sacred. And the moment you stop protecting those things, the world begins consuming them piece by piece. That is why closing the door becomes necessary. Close the door on distractions that steal your time. Close the door on people who only contact you when they need something. Close the door on conversations that poison your mindset. Close the door on habits that keep you emotionally weak. Because every distraction comes with a cost, and many people never realize how much of their potential is being destroyed by constant mental noise. Distraction is dangerous because it feels harmless in small amounts. One wasted hour becomes a wasted day. One bad habit becomes a destructive lifestyle. One toxic relationship slowly reshapes the way you see yourself. And before long, your energy becomes fragmented. You lose focus. You lose clarity. You lose discipline. Not because you lack purpose, but because too many things are competing for your attention. That is why chosen people eventually become more protective of their environment. They understand that peace is not weakness. Peace is power. A calm mind thinks clearly. A focused spirit moves intentionally. A disciplined person stops allowing chaos to enter their inner world. But protecting your peace requires difficult decisions. It means saying no even when others become uncomfortable. It means disappointing people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. It means walking away from environments that no longer align with your growth. And not everyone will understand that. Some people become angry when they lose access to you. Some interpret boundaries as rejection. Some call you distant simply because you stopped tolerating behavior that once drained your spirit. But growth changes your tolerance. The version of you that accepted constant disrespect cannot survive your next level. The version of you that needed validation from everyone cannot carry your future. The version of you that sacrificed inner peace just to keep people around eventually becomes exhausted. And exhaustion is often the signal that something in your life needs to end. Many chosen people spend years pouring energy into the wrong places, trying to save people who refuse to change, trying to prove their worth to individuals who never valued them, trying to maintain connections that are built entirely on emotional imbalance. But eventually, the soul becomes tired. You begin realizing that not every relationship is meant to be permanent. Not every conversation deserves your attention. Not every opportunity deserves your energy. And discernment begins developing. Discernment changes everything. You start noticing manipulation faster. You recognize when people only appear during moments of convenience. You become aware of environments that leave you emotionally drained after every interaction. And because your awareness increases, your desire for solitude also increases. Not because you hate people, but because your spirit can no longer tolerate constant chaos. That is one of the signs of awakening. You stop craving noise. You stop chasing attention. You stop forcing connections that feel spiritually heavy. Instead, you begin valuing stillness, focus, purpose discipline? Because the chosen one eventually understands that every open door influences their future. The people you listen to shape your thinking. The environments you tolerate shape your energy. The habits you repeat shape your destiny. Nothing is neutral. Everything either strengthens you or weakens you. That is why protecting your inner world becomes essential. Many people destroy their own peace because they are afraid of appearing rude. They continue giving access to individuals who constantly disrespect them emotionally. They allow negativity into their mind daily. They absorb everyone's problems while neglecting their own healing. And slowly their spirit becomes exhausted. But the chosen one learns that boundaries are not selfish. Boundaries are survival. Without boundaries, distractions consume your focus. Without boundaries, toxic people manipulate your emotions. Without boundaries, you begin living according to everyone else's expectations instead of your own purpose. And purpose requires separation. You cannot become who you were meant to be while constantly attached to what keeps pulling you backward. That is why some doors must remain closed permanently. Not every relationship deserves another chance. Not every opportunity is aligned with your future. Not every person who apologizes has truly changed. Sometimes reopening old doors simply reintroduces old pain. The chosen one learns this through experience. Every time you ignore your intuition, chaos follows. Every time you abandon your boundaries to keep others comfortable, your peace suffers. Every time you return to environments that already broke you once, your spirit becomes weaker. Until eventually, life teaches you the importance of protecting what is within you. Because your future depends on what you allow into your life. A distracted mind cannot build greatness. A wounded spirit cannot think clearly. An exhausted soul cannot operate in purpose. That is why separation becomes necessary for elevation. You begin choosing environments carefully. You become intentional with your time. You stop explaining your boundaries to people committed to misunderstanding you. And slowly, your life begins changing. Your energy becomes calmer. Your focus becomes sharper, your spirit becomes stronger. Not because life suddenly became easier, but because you finally stopped giving your power away to things that were never meant to carry access to your soul.